Welcome everyone, we're back here with the show Through the Eyes of a Cricketer. My guest today is someone that you may not have heard of. He has played for England, some 29 tests, and in fact is one of the first all-rounders for England. His name is Barry Knight. Thanks Barry for your time today, appreciate you being here. Where do I start with your career, Barry? In fact, there's a lot that we can talk about, not just simply your playing period from the 1960s, but also your coaching, your mentoring, and right to the current day with a number of the Indian players from Bangalore. Let's start with your playing time in particular. Tell us a bit about the 60s and playing cricket for England.
Well, it was a very interesting period to live in London. As you well know, the Beatles and Mary Quant, all this, it was all happening, the swinging 60s, and I call myself a swinging 60s cricketer because I started in 61, I finished in 69 when I came to this country and haven't been home since hardly. But my original career started at 15, the age of 15, where Trevor Bailey, the dour old batsman that Aussies love to hate, and one of the original all-rounders, found me playing in a school cricket match and asked my dad whether he could sign me up as a professional at the age of 15. I was still at school, East Ham Grammar. I also was playing at the time for West Ham Juniors with Bobby Moore and Geoff Hurst and Martin Peters, who all featured in the 1966, the only World Cup we ever won in soccer. And they were four of us, all played for Essex, Seconds and West Ham. They went to soccer and Bobby captained. They made a lot of money. They went for 100 quid a week, and I was getting 20, but I chose cricket, and here I am in Australia 79 years later. But that was how I started. A lot of people said I should have continued my education. I was trying to get to Cambridge University because they had the best pitch at Fenners for a batsman.
Now, the 29 tests you played for England, again, that category of an all-rounder is a very significant one. It was certainly, you're one of the very few all-rounders of the day, and obviously the likes of Botham and currently Ben Stokes and Flintoff are also in that picture. Yeah. But you're one of the original all-rounders from England, weren't you? Now, your in particular domestic career was quite amazing. Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, well, because Trevor Bailey found me, he became my mentor, and he was one of the early all-rounders who actually scored, I think I got 4 doubles, which is 1,000 runs and 100 wickets in a season. I think he did it 7 times, something like that. He had a better career than me, strangely enough. But no, so I followed up in his path. He used to open the bowling eventually one end and I opened the bowling the other, so I followed my mentor. But no, I just love to be in the game. I can't keep wicket, but Sobers can. He can do everything, but I can't do that, so I became a slip fielder eventually to save my legs. When you first start as a junior, you're at cover, mid-wicket, bowling 20 overs, and the body can stand it at 17, 18, 19. But eventually you use your seniority to get to slip. So you still bowl your 20 overs, you still bat as well as you can, but you stand at slip to save energy, if you can. So
you're obviously pre-World Series cricket.
Oh yeah.
Although that has a large part to play in your life in the future with the likes of Kerry Packer, which we'll talk about later. Let's look at the situation there where you had the professionals versus amateurs, and that whole concept that was prevalent in England at the time. And in fact, you were part of the amateur side of that, weren't you?
No. Okay. I was a professional. Now, because I signed at 15, the moment I put my signature on, I became Knight BR. When you went to Lord's in those days, you bought yourself a scorecard, and it said Knight BR T.E. Bailey. His initials were at the front because he was an amateur. The amateurs at that time were Peter May, Colin Cowdrey, so that's how you immediately say, oh, there's 7 professionals and 4 amateurs. Now, amateurs were supposed to get what was called broken time. So if you had a good job and you played for Essex or Middlesex or whatever, or you went on a tour, you were supposed to be paid what you were losing. So basically they weren't amateurs because they were getting paid. And Trevor Bailey was instrumental in changing all this in the 60s. But the difference is, and I could go on for hours on this is one of my pet subjects. I came out of a different entrance at Lord's. Trevor Bailey and the amateurs came down the middle through the members. We used to come out down the left-hand side. If you look at the pavilion, it'll be the right-hand side. Just down low, we used to come out of there if we were fielding, and the batsman came out of there. Sometimes an amateur would come down the middle, while a pro came and met him as an opening batter. It was very strange. They used to stay in different hotels. The amateurs, say we had 3 in our team, they'd stay at a very nice hotel. We'd be in digs up the back street somewhere, and
As a professional.
as a professional, sorry, yeah. And they would also, on a lot of grounds, not all of them, but for instance Old Trafford, there was an amateur dining room and a professional dining room. So all the professionals from both teams used to eat, like Brian Statham would be there opposite me or whatever, and Trevor Bailey and all the amateurs from my team, Doug Insall and Charlie Williams, they'd be up there eating with the amateurs from, there might be 5 of them up there, and the rest of us were all down here. I think the menu was no different. It was still the same old chicken leg, boiled potatoes, salad, and Heinz salad dressing. I do remember that for about 20 years.
Now, again, the SCG, in fact, the away dressing room has that same quirk
Oh, really?
with 2 separate doors where they would only enter it through certain
didn't
doors.
know that, huh?
And that's a peculiarity of the building from its original construction, which
Yeah.
is very interesting to come and see.
Because in Australia, that system never worked. Everybody was an amateur. When I played against them in '62, Richie Benno worked for the Sun Herald, Alan Davidson worked for the Commonwealth Bank, and I could go on. They all had jobs, and they didn't get much for playing, and even in the 60s. Alan Davidson once told me in the late 50s he used to get 10 shillings a day playing for New South Wales. And I said, that wasn't much. He said, oh, that was just for the laundry. We didn't get anything else. That
Amazing.
was to clean your whites. But he said, I said, why did you play? He said, I just loved the game.
Now, with that status of professional versus amateur, let's take your experiences now to the subcontinent and your tours to India and Pakistan and even with Sri Lanka.
Right. Well, I was lucky enough to be selected for my first tour in 1961 under the command of Ted Dexter, who was doing his first captaincy role, and I don't think Colin Cowdrey came on that one. My memory has gone a bit funny there, but we came out and we played. Nari Contractor was the captain of India. He'd recently been hit in the temple by Charlie Griffith, and we were part of his comeback. In fact, I played in the first test in Nagpur in '61, and his actual comeback game, I think he got 20 or something like that. But we were all a bit worried about bowling in bouncer, so he didn't get any from us, because he actually died on the pitch when Charlie Griffith, with his funny action, hit him very close to the temple, and he died, but they got him to hospital, and he did make a comeback. But so I was lucky enough to be on that tour.
It was 4 all up, wasn't it? It was 4 tours all up that you went to India.
4 or 5 to
Yeah,
India,
4 or 5, yeah.
2 to Australia, and anyway, on that particular trip, Fred Truman couldn't come because he had an injured back, which he didn't. He didn't want to go to India. Alec Bedser had a typewriter business with his brother Eric, and he found business much too important. So very few fast bowlers ever toured India. Brian Statham never went, and so I was in the second tier, if you like. I was first selected as an all-rounder because I could open the bowling. In those days, you were allowed to rub the ball in the dirt, and quite often in India, certainly in Delhi, Tony Locke, who was on our trip, after I think maybe I'd bowled the first over, he'd grab the ball, rub it in the dirt, and he'd open the bowling spinners. The seamers in India in the 60s, early 60s anyway, had a very small role to play because there were no quick wickets, there was no grass, and they all turned from ball 3, basically. So that you rubbed it in the dirt, and they had Jaisima, who was a lovely man, a good mate of mine. He bowled very gentle medium pace, about the same as Basil D'Oliveira, few paces and little outswingers. He opened the bowling for India, so nobody worried about opening like you did if Tomo and Lilly were playing. Everyone rushed to put the pads on, but then Prasanna and Borday and all these people, they had a million spinners, Salim Durrani, would open the other end and bowl right through the match. That was the tour of India. And of course we came from England, from green pitches that moved. Spinners didn't play a major part except off spinners like Jim Laker on wet pitches. But these were dry, turning pitches, and it took a while to get used to it. We managed to draw the first match, but eventually we lost the series 1-0, thanks to the fact that we played against 13 players in Calcutta, if you understand what I mean. There were 2 blokes in white coats who actually were applauded off I was not out at the end of the match 39, as I was walking off. They came in front of me and the crowd erupted and they both did this. I said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be impartial." Anyway, they'd fired about 10 of us out during the match and they won. But it's not sour grapes. That's why we now have 2 people from different countries, all caused by the India. South Africa were bad, they were terrible too. Pakistan weren't as bad, and but India, it was like playing 13 most of the time anyway, in that era, but not now, obviously.
Pakistan. Talk us through Pakistan.
Pakistan, 61, 62, it was a double tour. We were 6 months away. We left in September, we came home in March, and we went to Pakistan first, where Fazl Mahmud was the king. But luckily we were after the Koya mats, because when he played and they had the Koya mats on turf, when they batted, the Koya mat was stretched perfectly and you could hit through the line. But strangely enough, when Pakistan came to bowl, somehow it had gone a bit looser, like the pegs had come, and he bowled massive leg cutters and off cutters. He was like Shane Warne, only at about twice the pace. And if you look him up, he's got a very good record at home.
So in other words, you had grass, then you had the Koya above the grass.
Yeah, I played on a couple of them, but not in test matches. They'd gone from the tests by then. But Fazl Mahmud was a great cutter bowler. He bowled well in England as well, but I'll never forget that, seeing how this is very strange. We couldn't get it to do that. Our spinners didn't even turn it, but he's turning them like a spinner. But anyway, Pakistan was good. We played 2 tests first. Then we went to India. And then we went to East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, and played in Dhaka, where Hanif Mohammed, this is a memory I'll never forget, scored 100 in the first innings. And he was 96 not out in the second innings, because he was impossible to get out LBW in his own country. He played back for ages until he got his iron. He was a terrific player, don't get me wrong, but he was only a tiny little man. And it's funny, isn't it? Bradman, Hanif Mohammed, Lara wasn't that big. Some of the great players are very small. Anyway, Vishwanath, he was about 5 foot, and he was a good player. Anyway, Hanif Mohammed was 96. Anyway, I bowled him a bouncer. God knows where I got the energy from. I was on about 30 overs. And you didn't have to get it that high to get it over his head, but it was just above his head. He had a swat at it and got an enormous nick. Jeff Millman was the keeper. I remember distinctly taking it up here. And of course we all went up, but the umpire said, "Oh, I did not hear anything. No, not out." I thought, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" I was a little bit cross, so I came and I bowled a waist-high beamer, which he flicked for 4. Anyway, at the end of the over, I said to the umpire, "What's going on here?" He said, "No Pakistan batsman has ever scored 200s in a match against England." I said, "Well, he has now, hasn't he?" Anyway, that was, that tour. There are a lot of stories about bad umpiring, but I could keep you here for hours with those. I won't.
Well, we'll talk more after the break about your coaching career as well.
Mm-hmm.
So stay tuned through the eyes of a cricketer. Welcome back to Through the Eyes of a Cricketer. We've got Barry Knight here, what I believe, a very famous all-rounder from England, but more so his latter part of his career from 1970 onwards about his coaching. And in fact, he was the first so-called coach, you would call it, in Australia, had an indoor centre, was the first to use video photography or video cameras and video replays. Is it correct?
That's correct. 1970. I'd been coming over here during the late 60s. I played for Carlton in Melbourne. We were undefeated premiers there. I played with Dean Jones' dad, Barney Jones, who was the toughest cricketer I ever played. In fact, playing grade cricket in Victoria, or certainly in Melbourne, was the toughest, most verbal cricket I ever played. My first step onto the ground at Princess Park, I heard from the stands, "Go home, you effing pommy bastard." It was Keith Stackpole's dad.
Wow, you're kidding.
He was the only bloke there. There weren't many people watched. and they sledged enormously. I stepped away from my first 2 balls in grade cricket against Froggy Thompson. As I was about to face the ball, Froggy was 2 yards away from bowling. They were still talking at slip, saying very nasty things to me and encouraging Tomo to bowl a beamer. And they were still talking as he was going. So I stepped away I was used to in England, silence, playing in county cricket. Anyway, I stepped away twice, and the second time I said to the umpire, "Don't you keep them quiet?" He said, "No, you better get on with it, Barry, because it's going to keep happening the whole summer." I said, "Oh, God." Anyway, I soon got used to it. They talked the whole time, they sledged the whole time. But in grade cricket in that era, in the 60s, after the game, there was a big keg of beer in one of the dressing rooms, the home dressing room, and you'd be drinking with the opposition who'd been sledging hell out of you all day, and you became good friends with Alan Conley and Paul Shee and all these people. Anyway, that was an interesting little year of my life, 1967, and it really toughened me up. I wish I'd have had it earlier in my career. I would have become more Victorian. But then I came back and played for Balmain. Yet again, we won the championship that year. And then I played for Mossman for the next 15 years, and we never won the championship. So I had my ups and downs. But when I came back in 1970 to play for Mossman, I lost my nerve for flying. My wife was Australian, and she'd been working in show business. She was in My Fair Lady and had a singing group in England and Europe. But she'd been away from home for about 5 years, and because of it, I really didn't fancy flying 36 hours back to England. I'd just played in my last test at Trent Bridge against New Zealand, so I was still a current member of the team at that time, and assumedly, because Ray Ayling was captain and I played for Leicester with him, assumedly I would have got in next year and I would have come back in 1971, but I stayed here. I worked for Adidas on the promotion side, giving boots to all the cricketers, including the famous boots without the studs on the heel, for which John Benno got banned. I gave them to him. I said, "Don't be stupid, don't get banned because of them." But John is a very strong character, and he told Sid Webb, who was the big boss at the time, "We are going to wear them because they're very comfy," and they said, "No, you won't," and they took the captaincy off him, and he never played again. So that was, I wish I'd never given them to him now, because he could have played another 5 or 6 years. I had lunch with him not that long ago. I brought it up and he said, "I don't want to talk about it." He's that sort of bloke. Anyway.
So 1970.
That's when I started. And when I came, I'd been brought up in England, where our weather is so perfect, at indoor cricket centres. I had coached at one at Trevor Bailey, owned in Essex. I'd coached for Alf Gover, who had the first one in Wandsworth. And so I knew all about indoor coaching in 2 or 3 nets. So I thought, I'll have a try, because there's nothing like it here. And I was lucky in a way that there was no daylight saving in those days. Grade cricketers all worked, obviously, and there were no teams outside of the city in those days, no Penrith, no travelling. It was all inner city stuff. But to get practice on a Tuesday and Thursday, people had to either get off work a little bit earlier, but if they couldn't, and in a bank, for instance, and finished at 5, by the time they got to their ground, which may not have been that close to practice, they got there at 5:30, 5:45, it went dark. At 6 at the start of the season, 6:30 in the middle, and then at the end of the season got dark again, so they got virtually no practice. Grade cricketers would get, and I didn't open my centre for that. I opened it to coach. Jimmy Burke said to me, "Nighty," he said, "don't do it." I said, "Why?" Jimmy Burke was the opening bat for Australia at the time, and he said, "We're natural players in Australia. We don't have coaching. There are no coaches in Australia." He said, this was in 1970. He said, and you'll probably, pardon the French, he said, "you'll probably bugger up the system by introducing your MCC coaching technique, and we'll all look like bloody robots." That was his version. But luckily Richie Benno said, "No, Barry, open it." And he, with Phil Tressida, who was the sports writer on golf and cricket and rugby, I think for the Herald, They both backed me. Phil Tressida was the chairman of Randwick, and he brought all the Randwick boys to me, including Mike Whitney, who you've had on the show, when he was 15 or 16. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that I tried for 6 years to teach him how to bowl an in-swinger. Never happened. He was no Wasim Akram, I can tell you. But he got 7 wickets against West Indies, making the ball go to slip, so perhaps I was wrong. Anyway, so I started to build up a clientele of teams who couldn't get to practice, basically. But in between, I coached some pretty interesting players over the last, from that moment in 1970 until this day now, and Stephen O'Keefe is my last success. And I've coached 26 Australian cricketers, from Alan Border through the Waugh brothers, through the Lee brothers. Anyway, 26 of them all passed through my hands, either at the indoor cricket centres in the 70s that I had in Sydney. I had 3 different ones. And then over the years, coaching with Doug Walters on hot school holiday programs. They've all passed through my hands at the age between, say, 12 and 17. The Waugh brothers, for instance, came to me for 2 years in Kent Street. From their age was, I think, 13 and 14 when I coached them.
There's not a person I know that many of the cricketing tragics that I know have been through your schools or your clinics at some stage or another, and it's quite astounding to me, and for our audience in particular, what Barry Knight has done for Australia has probably helped not only Australian players but a wide gamut of cricketers across the board. I want to just take you quickly now. We can talk more about the coaching, but one that particularly impresses me is the more recent example of the boys, let's call them, from Bangalore. That is KL Rule. You had the likes of Pandey, Manish Pandey, and obviously Karun Air. Those 3 players. Now tell us about that story, only recently.
I wasn't aware of this, but 8 years ago I went to I think it's called the Nayan University, which is just south of Bangalore, and I had 50 boys for a week, and a big coaching, beautiful setup, lovely ground. I think there were 10 nets, some super turf nets and ordinary ones. Best coaching setup I've ever worked at, actually. Anyway, I was there and I coached these 50 boys who ranged from the age of 12 through to 18, 19. And then I recently discovered, someone wrote to me from the university and said that, do you realise, Barry, during that period you coached KL Rahul, who's now opening the batting, Karun Nair, who scored 300, and
in a recent test match.
Manish Pandey, who he is bordering on test, but I think he's playing one days. So I only had him for a week, but I did coach him.
Well, I'm sure there's a lasting impact from your work upon them.
I hope so.
Let's just take an example of, say, Alan Border. Talk through the eyes of a cricketer, how he saw cricket and how you saw cricket and how you influenced him.
This is a half hour on Alan. But Alan was a Mossman boy. His house was over mid-off, right? Straight over mid-off. And but he was last at the ground every time. He was a very sloppy young man. When I first met him at the age of 14, he was a baseball fanatic and extremely good. Wonderful fielder, great arm, and a fairly good hitter. Anyway, so his real love, and his brothers, he had 2 other brothers, they really preferred baseball to cricket. But because he lived so close to the ground, he used to come over to practice, and his brothers. And so I was the captain coach of Mossman for a long time, from 1970. So I had him in my Green Shield team, which is under 16s, and I had him in the 3rd 11 for a while. But his fielding was that good, and we had a slightly ageing first 11, including me, obviously, and we needed a bit of an injection of fielding. And the selectors took a punt when he was 15 and said, look, we'll play him as a fielder, because he could cover the cover area where a lot of our fellas were in their late 30s and what have you, and weren't highly trained in those days because they had to work. All of them worked, and they had 2 nights practice, which isn't quite enough to make you physically fit and good at batting or bowling. And so anyway, he was picked, and he fielded and he batted number 9, and he was a left-arm seamer at the time, turning into a left-arm orthodox spinner. But I never gave him a bowl at that time. That first year he played at number 9. And just in the one match there was a leg spinner called Dick Guy who played for Gordon and New South Wales. He was a sort of rolling type spinner, not a big spinner, had a wrong un, but he was accurate and a little bit loopy. Anyway, Alan went in number 9 and we hadn't got a very good score. And I remember quite distinctly him sweeping Dick Guy over the pavilion at Mossman. We were playing on the near side of the ground. It was a massive hit. And he got 30 runs off about 3 overs, all off Dick. He didn't get up the other end. And we suddenly thought, oh, maybe this bloke can bat. So the following season he crept up from 9 to 7 to 6. Anyway, practice was a nightmare because we'd be starting. David Colley was in the team, who played for Australia, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And David and I'd be there. He was in the advertising game, so he'd already been out for an advertising lunch and was often a bit wobbly at practice, but he still came. But where were the borders, we said? Anyway, eventually I found out that they were down on Balmoral Beach, which curved around into a rocky area, which was one of the first nude beaches in Sydney. And where did I find them? 9 times out of 10, at Balmoral Beach. I'd go and grab them and drag them up to practice half an hour late. So Border was not the keenest. Anyway, I gave him a scholarship when he was 17 perhaps, to come to my centre in Kent Street for the winter once a week. Right? And he came, I think, maybe with the War Brothers, about that time. Maybe a bit before them. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And anyway, I taught him how to cover drive. I taught him everything I knew that once a week. I gave him an individual lesson. Then I fixed him up to go to Gloucester in Bristol to play in their equivalent there of grade cricket, which of course is just club cricket. And that's where he learnt to pull on the slower wickets, because he always was quite a good puller. Eventually, I mean, when he played Test cricket. And he came back just a little bit enthused. So I sat him down at the start of the season. I think we went to the Buena Vista. I think he wasn't quite old enough, so he had a lemonade, and I had a beer. And I said, listen, I've been in professional cricket since I was 15. I was now 40 something. I said, I've been around the world 15, 20 times. I said, I've seen every part of the world except France, where they don't play cricket, unfortunately. And I said, you're going to be playing baseball for Australia. You might be lucky to get to Japan and play against their 30th team. You might get to America and just play local grade type, if you like. That's as if you get in the Australian team, right? I said, and you probably will. He was good enough. I said, and that'll be it, because baseball in the 70s, early 70s, was nothing in Australia. It was a game that nobody even considered. And the talk somehow got through, and he started to channel his interest into playing cricket. Anyway, we got him into the New South Wales team. Tony Greig gave him a job. You may remember the Lion on the Line, when Tony Greig had the insurance company
Yes.
that Kerry Packer had set up for him in return for getting all the players. Anyway, he went and didn't sell a policy. All I'm trying to get at, Alan is very lucky he became a cricketer. He cannot work, right?
Thanks, Barry. We might go to a break now on Through the Eyes of a Cricketer. Welcome back to Through the Eyes of a Cricketer. Barry was talking a lot about Alan Border. Please continue on that topic, Barry.
Well, Alan, as I say, I played with as his captain. I didn't give him a bowl very often because I didn't reckon he was any good, and we had a couple of good spinners. When he got his 6 wickets, I think, or 7 wickets at the SCG against West Indies, I sent him a telegram. It was telegrams in those days, remember, saying, well bowled, but I still wouldn't bowl you, right? He wasn't too pleased, actually. He didn't take it in the spirit it was sent. Anyway, I stood at first slip and he stood at second slip for many years together, and eventually he got the offer from Queensland to go there because he didn't have a job he hadn't been able to hold a job in New South Wales, and they offered him a job selling cars in Brisbane. So he joined them. They didn't sell a car. Then the mobile phones started to come in. He got a job selling mobile phones. He didn't sell many of those, and they were easy to sell. So luckily for him, he then got selected to play for Australia when the money was starting to get a little bit better, and he's been able to survive his whole adult life now as a professional cricketer. And he certainly would never have worked in any other industry. It's funny.
That's quite a statement.
No, he wouldn't. He'd admit it if I said face to face. He just didn't like work. Okay.
Well, I mean, he certainly knew how to work on a cricket field, though. He certainly knew.
Oh, God, yes.
He was a very
amazing
tradesman-like.
player. But if you looked at his technique, nothing fancy. He was very susceptible to the ball going across him. In his early days, he used to fiddle and get out a lot. But he worked hard on that. But he was always a lovely player of spinners, as illustrated what I said about how he slaughtered Dick Guy, a state player, when he was only 15, 16. So he never lost that.
Now, with the wars, of course, namely Steve, or let's talk about Steve now, obviously Border was almost a continuation into war in the way he played, that very resolute way of playing, the very, very much the person who wanted to make sure he was in the centre of the game, never away from it. Tell me about Steve Waugh and the relation we had
Well,
there.
Steve and Mark used to come on a Thursday night with Rod Bauer, who was nearly the record holder in grade now. Rod Bauer was twice as good a player. He was a wonderful back foot player, best back foot player I've coached out of the 30,000 people. But he had a slight back problem, and in the early days of physiotherapy, they took him to the Lewisham Clinic and stretched him on a a rack, I suppose, to do that. Anyway, he came back at the start of the next season, having had a bit of back trouble. He was playing for New South Wales, but his fielding got a bit dicey because his back was bad. So that's why he went to the Lewisham Clinic. But he came back and he was just as bad. So I was a friend of Dr. Brian Corrigan, who's recently died, who was the Rome Olympics doctor, Richie Benaud's best mate, 3 tours, I think, as the doctor of the Australian cricket team. The nicest man. I sent him to Dr. Corrigan, who took pictures of his back, and he said, "You've got a gap about that big in your back. What you been doing?" He said, well, he told him about he said, "Oh, God." He said, "You probably had a hairline fracture when you went to the Lewisham Clinic, and they've opened it up." And he threw him a corset across the desk and said, "Put that on for 6 months, start of the cricket season, just coming up. 6 months, he had to wear it to allow this back to seal itself up again." And he came back, but he was just too late. He'd lost his chance at that time, and he played for Bankstown and then Penrith for years, and I think he and Stan McCabe are the top scorers in grade cricket. Beautiful play. But to illustrate, when they were 12, 13, he was miles better than the Waugh brothers, who are now quite famous. But they used to come every Thursday. Paul Talbot, left arm spinner, about 4 of them from the Bankstown area. The father used to bring them. And I learned eventually from reading a book by Mark Waugh that they only came because they said to their dad, Roger, I think it is, yeah, Roger, "We'll only go," that Hoyts had just opened with McDonald's inside it, and the deal was they would all come every Thursday provided they were allowed to go to the new McDonald's in Hoyts afterwards to have whatever. So that was what it was said in the book. But no, they
So
were
you're
good.
claiming that McDonald's maybe helped their career?
Oh, of course, they should be ambassadors. But I didn't pick them at that time. You see, just briefly, I've picked 25 players that I've coached over the years, and I've said they'll play for Australia. Not one of them did, because they were too good, too soon. My best advantage is a boy called Rod Ford, spelled F-O-R-D. He was Justice Ford's son, who was a famous barrister and judge. He was left arm quick, and he was quick at 14, 15. He batted beautifully, fielded at a great arm, etc., etc. Used to turn up for under-age matches, 100, no time, 6 wickets, all too easy. Green Shield, great. Got to 17, playing 4th grade, 3rd grade. Suddenly the men were bigger and stronger, and they'd catch him. See, when you're a strong hitter and you're young, these people that score 300 in under 14s, they've probably been dropped 10 times because the kids can't catch at that age. They haven't got big enough hands. And that happened a bit to Rob. Anyway, he's now a barrister somewhere and I saw him the other day at the SCG teaching his own son. But I would have picked at 15 to be batting number 4 for Australia, opening the bowling, and being a great cover fielder like Neil Harvey. And there are plenty more like that. But the 27 I coached include John Dyson, very ordinary cricketer, played across the line when he was young. John Dyson Rickson, Steve Rickson, very ordinary. Andrew Hilditch, who played 30-odd times and was vice-captain of Australia. Little chubby boy whose mum bought him a bowling machine to put in the garden at Lillypilly, where he lived, and his batting improved. But both of them had him, got him out hooking 3 times in his last 3 tests. But these boys I would never have picked. So all I'm trying to say is, coaches that say to you, here's a boy of 15, he's going to play for Australia, forget it. It depends what's in here, not what's in the hands, right?
Very good points, actually. And again, through the eyes of a cricketer, that steely glare of a border or war and that determination obviously shone through by what you're saying.
Well, Steve Waugh obviously changed his game. He was a bit more of a stroke player when I had him, but he realised very quickly that the determined, dogged play was better for him. It took him 15 tests, remember, to score a test century. I don't think he would survive in the modern world. I don't think they would have given him 15 tests these days. But Bobby Simpson was roughly the same. Bobby was well into the teens of when he scored the 311 at Manchester against Australia. That was his first 100. It's still on his car. But BS 311, right? Anyway, and so he adapted his game to suit Test cricket, basically, and he became one of the best Test cricketers of all time, and followed in the tradition of Ian Chappell that I saw just the start of in the 70s, of being a very good sledger.
On and off the field, perhaps.
No, not so much off. No. He's a very quiet bloke off. Something you don't know, that he owns 3 banks, I think, the actual buildings. He's a very cute investor too.
That's impressive, that's for sure.
And Mark doesn't, because he probably has lost more than he's ever made on the horses. But Mark was a totally different character even in those days. He was very laid back. He was the one that wanted to go to McDonald's perhaps and not practice. But he just had a lot of natural ability which came out later in life.
So you're still an avid watcher of cricket now, aren't you, Barry?
Yeah.
And all forms of cricket, namely T20.
Even the 2020, where Peter Philpott rang me up and said, because Peter was an educator as well as one of the best coaches in Australia, and certainly the best leg spin coach. He taught Warne and he taught Jenner, all those people, when he was young. And he's been involved at Shaw School in Sydney, a big school, King's, and another one I've forgotten now. And so he said 2020 will ruin cricket. I said, why? He said, because they'll start to play it in the schools. On a Saturday, the master in charge of cricket prefers not to go from 10 to 6. He will much prefer to go from 10 to 12. And it will gradually creep in, and we will never breed a proper... This was his first reaction when 2020, the Big Bang came in, 5-6 years ago. Anyway, so... but both of us now have come round. I was a bit against it too. I even went and watched a match this year, so I actually went and saw the fireworks and all this. And I'm sort of falling in love with it. But how do you keep the balance now? Because they can't get any crowds at Test matches now in India, can they?
No,
but they can pack the stadiums for an hour and a half's game or whatever it is, 2 hours.
You look at the IPL, obviously you're talking about crowds, they have enormous crowds. Now, we've always looked at Pakistan as a country that's been without cricket ever since the incident against Sri Lanka. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I toured there and I'm still alive. I know it's different now, but eventually they're going to have to, they'll either go out of Test cricket, I think, or get back and start playing in their own country if it has to be extreme security, it has to be, right? And whether or not they can get through a few years without incident, I hope they can, because nobody wants to play in Dubai. It's hot, the crowds, they've got a few people of their own coming in, but there's never anybody from the opposition. I mean, not many Aussies go and watch the Aussies play in Dubai, do they? I mean,
No.
you haven't been, have you?
Oh, I have, luckily.
yeah.
I have actually. I have passed through and watched the match there, I must
Okay,
admit.
but you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Playing in front of your own crowd is a big lift.
Absolutely.
I mean, how did Dennis Lilly keep going with that bad back? It was the chanting, and Bay 13 kept him on the field for 3 years, I reckon.
Now, another good chapter to what could happen in Pakistan very shortly is the fact that Australia looks like they're going to be touring Bangladesh in, I believe, August, I think the time is. They're going to be playing a couple of tests. There's been some news reports about that recently. That's a good start,
Yeah.
because Bangladesh had issues as well.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, you toured, as you called it, East Pakistan, and the likes of Pakistan and India. Tell me one moment that sticks in your mind the most, through the eyes, as you were then a cricketer.
Well, I've already told you the Hanif bit.
Yes.
That sticks in my mind. The other one was when we were told the night before that there was a smallpox epidemic sweeping through the area, and we had to be careful and perhaps should wear masks. And we said, why? They said, because the smallpox virus can be carried in dust. And we thought, God, we're playing at Dhaka tomorrow, there'll be at least 30,000 people. It hasn't rained for a month, so that encourages a bit of dust. Anyway, you should have watched as we lost the toss and we went out to field, and we were all a bit like this for a little while with a hand over the face. But we played 5 days. I'm still alive. So that was as big a scare, if you like, as a security scare. But I'm just hoping that there are enough policemen, there are enough people to guard. But in India, for instance, I've played at Eden Gardens, where they set light to the cloth that was a canopy to keep the sun off the members and half the crowd over that side. There were 100,000 people there, by the way, that day. They'd sold the tickets 3 times over, I think, because there were 10 people killed during the match, knifings.
My gosh.
We watched them being passed out over the crowd because people had sold the same seat 3 times. And so 3 people arrived to sit in D21. Oh, here's my ticket. Anyway, that was a bit of a problem. So they probably could have got 200,000 in there, really. But anyway, some idiot put a light to the end, and of course it hadn't rained for a long time. And this fire, we were fielding actually, and we saw this fire over there at Third Man, and it started to sweep round towards cover, and the people were running everywhere, obviously, because it was quite a big blaze. Anyway, then the crowd started to get a bit dodgy, and we ran off the field, right? And everyone said, "You better get near the coach. We've got to get back." This was Calcutta, sorry, Eden Garden, to the Great Eastern Hotel, which was about 4 kilometres away, right? Something like that. Anyway, we assembled outside, and the game finished. It was late in the afternoon anyway. They were all full of illegal gin, I think, the whole crowd anyway. So we jumped in, but we were stoned as we left. I don't know why. We hadn't done anything. We were just fielding. But then I spoke to Ryan Kanai a few years later, and he said, "Barry, that was nothing." He said they burnt the whole bloody stadium down when we were there, and I was batting. That's him, Kanai talking. I had my pads on. I had to run the 4 kilometres to the Great Eastern, where they stayed the same, with a crowd about 200 yards behind him. Because when he came off, they'd gone. His team had gone.
Oh, no.
In the coach. And so I can't remember who he was batting. It might have been Peter Lashley. But they both had to just keep going. Right? He didn't have his bat. He left his bat, but he had his gloves on and everything else. And he just got back, and the crowd didn't really know what they were chasing him for, because in India, we used to go to the cinema. We come out, there'd be 8,000 people outside. We'd say, "What, is there a premiere of a film coming up after us?" And they said, "No, they've come to see you." What? Ridiculous. That's how mad they were for cricket in the 60s, right?
And look, to me, what you're telling us both in that time and through the current, you've given us a number of stories here today. I really appreciate your insightfulness as to your time, and through the eyes of the cricketer certainly welcomes you here today, and we'll come back and get you to talk more in the future. Thank you for your time, Barry.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again.